At my son's wedding, the MC skipped my name. My place card shoved me by the exit, and I said nothing about the 100 million beach house my husband left me. I felt the familiar ache, but let years of teaching widowhood and hard-won calm stiffen my spine instead of my voice. The next time they came smiling with simple papers and even a notary, I didn't open the door. I read my rule aloud: no documents without my attorney. That quiet line in the sand was only the beginning. The real unraveling started when their plans hit the paper walls I'd built. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. The first thing I noticed was the sea air. It threaded through the tall windows of the Charleston ballroom, lifting the corners of linen cloths and carrying a whisper of salt. I smoothed the skirt of my navy dress and told my hands to be still. It was my son's day after all. I wanted to be nothing but proud. But the chandeliers threw soft light over polished wood and white orchids. Waiters moved like careful tides, steady and quiet. I stood for a moment near the entrance, watching faces I had watched grow up now, lined with adult cares and expensive smiles. Gideon had chosen spring for his wedding. Outside, azaleas burned pink along the square. Inside, the band tested a saxophone, a hopeful ribbon sound. I drew a breath and felt both the years behind me and the weight of the evening ahead. Pride, yes, but also an unease I could not name a ripple under glass. I told myself I was ready, a mother widow, a teacher who could stand still in a room. The breeze touched my neck like a blessing. An usher with a practiced smile led me through the room. We passed the head table, all crystal and pale roses, then curved toward the far wall where a wide pillar swallowed part of the view. He stopped there and pulled back a chair. "Here you are," he said, cheerful and certain, as if placing a lost book back on its shelf. A small card rested on the cloth: Anne Louise. Not mother of the groom, not even my name. I touched the serif letters with one finger, the way you test a bruise. A music stand blocked my sightline to the dance floor. A service door sighed open and shut, bringing the scent of lemon cleaner and heat from the kitchen. I wanted to laugh at the precision of it. The corner seat beside a pillar, the thrum of air conditioning, the misprint that made me a footnote in my own life. I did not ask to be moved. The boy had taken my coat, the card said what it said, and my heart had no appetite for scenes. I slid into the chair and folded my hands, a habit from years of faculty meetings. My napkin felt too white. Across the room, the bride's parents accepted warm hellos, embraces that landed and stayed. No one looked toward the edge. I practiced the small tricks that keep a woman upright: count the breaths, lift the chin, choose a thought kinder than the moment. When the band began the processional, I let the room blur and become sound. My son would appear, and I would not miss him for anything, not even this careful exile. I set the card beneath my water glass. It set. The invitation had been beautiful. No one could deny that. Heavy paper blue ink that looked wet even when dry, a sketch of live oaks along the Battery. I had turned it over in my kitchen, the fan turning lazily above, and read the line that slipped a stone in my stomach. Annalisa Morin, +1 guest. A +1 for the mother, as if I would pluck a stranger from church to justify my seat. I told myself it was a template error, a mistake made in a rush. I set it beside Michael's photograph and decided to be gracious. Tonight, though, with the pillar at my shoulder and the service door breathing at my back, the memory sharpened. Someone had made a choice about where I belonged. Across the room, the MC welcomed the bride's family, stringing titles and praise like pearls on a wire. He introduced philanthropists, a judge, the aunt who underwrote the string quartet. Their names drew smiles that held. When the MC turned to our side, he said simply, "And to the groom's family," and moved on. Polite applause sloped across the floor and died near my shoes. I felt the old skill of swallowing hard without noise, a talent forged in widowed years when grief arrived in public spaces. I waited. At my table, a couple from the bride's office landed briefly, offering small talk about traffic. They glanced at my place card, blinked, and recovered with a quick, bright smile. A waiter refilled my water and set down a roll. "Beautiful night," he murmured, and I thanked him as if he had extended sanctuary. I kept my posture gentle, my face tidy. This too is work. I remembered nights when Gideon studied at the kitchen table while I graded essays. The two of us lived on thrift and resolve. After Michael died, the beach house became a promise I guarded, the last place where his laughter lived in the walls, our son stacking driftwood forts below the porch. I paid taxes on time-repaired Storm's small teeth and kept the key on a ring by my bed. Love, I have learned, can be a practical thing. Dinner plates began their quiet tour of the room. From my corner, I caught fragments the sheen of Gideon's sleeve, the veil flicking like a gull's wing, the practiced ease of families who know where to stand. A cousin I had not seen in years almost waved, then looked through me with confusion reserved for substitutes. Rooms teach cues, people follow them. I told myself to claim the inches I owned, chair, napkin, glass, a sliver of view. I traced a bead of water and thought of the ordinary labors that kept us safe. The fees paid papers, signed drives to practice the roof patched after storms. Strength can be quiet. It keeps the lights on. The singer welcomed everyone back from cocktail hour, her voice sliding easy. I lifted my glass and caught my reflection. Calm a woman who could wait out weather. Endurance is not the same as belonging. It only keeps you upright while others decide the dance. So, I realized my place in the room mirrored my place in their new life at the very edge. From my seat at the edge of the ballroom, I tried to steady my hands against the linen. The music lifted, the laughter swirled, and I reminded myself to breathe as if I were still at the front of a classroom waiting for children to settle. I watched the glow around the bride's family. They were greeted with warmth embraces that lingered compliments folded into every word. Their table shone at the center of the room, roses opening under light. I shifted slightly, willing my face to hold calm, even as the sense of distance grew wider with each cheer that seemed to leap past me. It was easier to imagine myself as a guest at a stranger's celebration than the mother who had raised the groom. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, a cheerful ring cutting through the chatter. "Let's give a hand for the wonderful families who brought us here tonight." His smile was a current drawing the crowd. He spoke the bride's parents' names with dignity, weaving their careers and their generosity into a glowing tribute. Applause erupted. He turned to extended relatives, naming their accomplishments, their travels, their support for the couple. The ballroom clapped as though every word were true gold. My ears strained, waiting for the rhythm to land on me. But the sentence ended, the cheer faded, and my name had never crossed his lips. People shifted uncomfortably, a ripple of eyes scanning the room. I felt the burn of omission more than if he had spoken an insult aloud. I forced myself, still hands folded, lips turned in a small, polite line. Silence can be armor when words fail. Inside, though, I heard the echo of my absence as loudly as the applause. Then the lights dimmed and a screen flickered to life above the dance floor. A journey of family moments, the MC announced. Music swelled soft piano, carrying images of childhood summers, school graduations, beach trips. The guests murmured, pointing, smiling. Then a photo appeared, one I remembered clearly. Gideon's 12th birthday candles bending in sea breeze, frosting on his chin. I had been there, my arm around him, Michael's watch shining on my wrist. But on the screen, only Gideon and a cake remained. My body was gone, cropped away. Another photo followed a Christmas morning. I remembered holding wrapping paper, laughing, wearing a scarf I had knitted myself. On the slideshow, the scarf appeared on the floor, but I did not. The erasure was so clean it felt surgical. Whispers passed between tables. "Wasn't she there?" a voice asked softly behind me. I swallowed against the weight pressing my chest. I stayed seated. To stand would be to confess a wound in public. Instead, I clasped my napkin, letting my fingers bear what my face must not show. During dessert, a woman leaned over from the next table. "Strange," she said lightly. eyes kind but curious. "I thought you'd be in that picture." I gave her a small smile as though it were nothing at all. My voice stayed low measured. "Memory plays tricks, doesn't it?" She nodded, uncertain, before turning back to her coffee. The ache sat between my ribs like a stone. I had spent years carrying Gideon through nights of fever, through the grief of losing his father, through bills that stacked higher than I could count. Yet here, in this bright hall, my presence had been erased with the click of a crop tool, the ease of a decision made at someone else's desk. As the evening wore on, I realized this night was not only about vows or rings. It was about stories, and whose names would be written into them. I watched my son raise a toast, his hand steady, his smile broad. He did not glance toward the edge where I sat. The music rose again, the crowd cheered, and I felt myself fading into a ghost of the room. I whispered a truth only I could hear. It was as if I had never existed in their version of our family. After the slideshow, the ballroom softened into smaller pockets of chatter. The music shifted to a lighter tempo, and waiters threaded between groups carrying trays of champagne. I stayed at my edge table, resting my palms flat against the cloth, as if anchoring myself there. My body felt heavier than the dress I wore. People began drifting into corners, laughter rising, the bride's family glowing at the center. I sipped water, tasting nothing, watching the swirl of new alliances and old acquaintances. It struck me that while the evening was meant to celebrate two lives joined, it seemed more like a performance of families claiming territory. I felt myself receding, a spectator among strangers, holding my silence like a fragile cup. Vera, the bride's mother, approached with a sparkle in her eyes that did not quite reach her core. She raised her glass high, catching the light, her voice bright enough for others to hear. "From now on, the children will take care of everything. We can finally relax." Around us, heads nodded. Approving laughter rolled like a soft tide. To anyone else, it sounded like an innocent joke, a toast to youth and transition. To me, the words pressed like a hand against a closed door. They suggested that my years of responsibility of keeping bills paid and roofs steady no longer mattered, that I had been gently retired from relevance. I forced a smile thin as tissue, while the edges of her statement echoed. Guests leaned closer, clapping lightly, some repeating the line with approval. My tongue felt heavy. In the quiet of my chest, the sting sharpened into a blade no one else could see. I stayed still, the picture of politeness, but every nerve in me heard the dismissal. Then Celine glided toward me, radiant in lace and pearls, her veil trailing like a wisp of fog. She took my hand, her skin cool and soft. "We only want to protect you, Mother," she whispered, eyes shining too brightly. "You shouldn't worry about burdens like the house." Her voice poured sweetness, each word syruped with affection, yet the undertone cut deep. I looked into her eyes and caught the flicker of calculation, the measured glint of someone who already knew her lines. To others, it appeared a touching moment, a bride honoring her new mother-in-law. To me, it felt like a rehearsal for erasure staged with precision. She squeezed my hand gently, tilting her head with practiced grace. "Enjoy tonight," she added. "Let us handle the future." The words lingered in my ear, heavy, as stone wrapped in ribbon. I nodded faintly, offering no protest, because protest would only feed their narrative of me as frail. My silence again was armor. I searched for Gideon's face in the crowd. He hovered nearby, his expression unreadable, his glass turning slowly in his hand. He did not interrupt Vera's toast or Celine's sweet decree. He said nothing at all. His silence was worse than their words. It pressed against me like a verdict heavier than accusation. I remembered him as a boy clutching my sleeve, begging me to stay by his side. Now he stood still, allowing others to speak for him, for us. My heart tightened in its cage. As I sat there, I began to sense the pattern. These were not scattered missteps or careless oversights. They were threads woven together, preparing a tapestry I was never meant to see. I lifted my glass again, though it was empty, and whispered to myself, It wasn't just neglect, it was preparation. The morning after the wedding, my house was still as if it had been holding its breath with me. I set the kettle on, lined up 2 teacups, though I was alone, and opened the kitchen window to let the sea breeze wash in. The air carried salt and the faint cry of gulls. I folded napkins into neat squares, watered the porch geraniums, and tried to convince myself that order could quiet memory. The ballroom shadows still pressed against me, but I told myself time would soften Gideon's silence. A mother's role is to hope. And so I clung to the thought that perhaps after the whirlwind of celebration, he would remember I was still his anchor. The doorbell broke through the hum of the kettle. When I opened it, Gideon stood there, Celine at his side, and behind them a man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase. They stepped in without hesitation, Celine's voice bright as she said, "Just a quick formality." The attorney placed a thick folder on my kitchen table, his pen clipped neatly on top. A sticky note marked my name, spelled incorrectly, a small insult hidden in plain view. Celine smiled. "It's a durable power of attorney mother. Just initials here and there. It's only to streamline things, protect you, avoid confusion." The words slid out like memorized lines. I pulled the folder closer, reading headings: immediate effect, broad powers, real property authority. My throat tightened, but I asked, calm as chalk on a board, "What is the scope? Can it be revoked? When does it take effect?" The attorney replied smoothly, "It's standard, Mrs. Morley. Nothing unusual." Celine touched my hand as though soothing me, but her eyes urged speed. The pages turned fast tabs already placed for signatures. The attorney pointed briskly, "Here, here, here." Celine leaned closer. "We only worry with you being alone. This avoids risks." I inhaled slowly, counted to 5, then to 10. I had learned long ago that silence could be resistance. "I don't sign what I haven't reviewed," I said evenly. Celine's smile stiffened. The attorney leaned back, his tone rehearsed. Delay could expose the family to risk. My heart hammered, but my voice did not shake. "I'll need copies and independent counsel. That's final." The kettle shrieked behind me, and I let the sound fill the pause. Gideon shifted, glancing at Celine. At her nod, he spoke at last. "Mom, please don't make this difficult." The words landed harder than any slight at the wedding. When I rose, he didn't embrace me. He turned toward Celine, his fingers sliding into hers, his body angled away. My son, once who clung to me in storms, now braced himself against me. The attorney tapped his pen, waiting, but I only opened the door. Celine's voice followed, syrup thick. "It's for your own good." I did not answer. I stood tall as they filed out their faces, a mask of concern strained thin by frustration. The door closed. The house exhaled into quiet. I poured the boiled water into my cup, the steam rising. I wrote 3 short lines on an index card and taped it by the door. No documents accepted without independent counsel. Drafts 48 hours in advance. All meetings scheduled through my attorney. Then I walked to the cabinet, lifted the brass key to the beach house safe, and slipped it into my pocket. The truth was clear now. None of this was accident. It had been a plan. That evening, an envelope slid through the slot, an invitation to brunch, hosted by Vera. I read it twice, set it on the counter, and whispered to myself, "Yes, I'll go." The invitation from Vera had been printed on thick cream paper, embossed with the club's insignia. It arrived as if I were a dignitary rather than an afterthought. My instinct was to decline, yet something in me said to go to see the stage they were setting. On Sunday morning, I drove slowly along the river until the white columns of the club appeared through the oaks. A jazz trio floated soft notes across the veranda, and waiters moved gracefully with trays of mimosas. I walked in alone, aware of the glances that slid over me, appraising, measuring. My steps were steady, but beneath them, apprehension hummed. I had barely taken a seat when Cousin Sable swept toward me. She had a voice designed to carry, and she made sure it did. "Older folks should hand things down before it gets messy," she declared, her words sugar-dipped but sharp enough to slice. A ripple of laughter stirred among nearby guests, awkward and complicit. I set my napkin in my lap and met her eyes with a thin smile. "Some things aren't ready to be handed away," I said quietly. The chuckles subsided into an uneasy hush. It wasn't the volume of her remark that stung, it was how quickly others accepted it, how swiftly disrespect could be dressed as common sense. Midway through the meal, the performance faltered. A server stumbled near Vera's chair and a folder slipped open across the linen. Papers scattered, fluttering like startled birds. I bent forward just as others did, and my eyes locked on an invoice bearing my name. It was for the video montage shown at the wedding, the same presentation that had been praised as Vera's family's gift. I froze, the numbers glaring up like a verdict. Vera's hand moved swiftly, covering the document, gathering the sheets into a hasty pile. Celine's lips curled into a half smile, the kind you flash when a secret has just been confirmed. But it was too late. A few guests had already seen. One leaned across, whispering, "I thought Vera's family covered that." My throat tightened. I held my silence, though fire roared inside me. They had stolen not just credit, but dignity. At the far end of the table, Gideon sat with Selena. He shifted his eyes, grazing mine for a heartbeat. There was a chance, a breath of hope that he might speak, might correct the lie hanging in the air. Instead, he looked away, sipping his drink, his silence cementing the theft. My gaze lingered until he shifted again, restless under the weight of what he refused to carry. Words rose to my tongue, but I swallowed them. His silence hurt more than their mockery because it was complicity dressed as peace. The brunch wound down, plates cleared, laughter returning in shallow waves. I lifted my glass, once nodded politely, and excused myself. In the parking lot, the spring air smelled of magnolia, heavy and sweet, yet I tasted only bitterness. Walking to my car, I thought of the invoice, the remark, the silence, each one a stone laid carefully on a path leading away from me. They weren't accidents. They were patterns rehearsed and deliberate. If they could steal credit so easily, what else were they preparing to take? The call came early, just as the light was breaking across the marsh. I reached for the phone with one hand while steadying my coffee cup with the other. The voice on the line was my bank officer, his tone low and cautious. "Mrs. Annalisa, I wanted to alert you. There was an attempt yesterday to authorize a lien against your beach house." I sat still, my knuckles whitening against the cup. He went on, saying the request came from a young woman who claimed she was authorized. He could not provide a name, but the description, a polished, confident voice, younger, brought Selena to mind immediately. I kept my own voice, even noting every detail, thanking him for calling. My pulse raced, but outwardly I remained calm, asking for a follow-up copy of the attempt. By mid-morning, I was at the bank. The marble lobby seemed colder than usual, the air conditioning sharp against my skin. The officer slid a folder across the desk, and there it was, a durable power of attorney already on file, supposedly bearing my signature. My throat tightened. I had never signed. The dates were pre-filled, the ink mechanical, the signature, an imitation that almost but not quite resembled mine. They had prepared this in advance, counting on my silence. "We'll flag your accounts," the officer said, stamping a bright red hold across the paperwork. "We'll freeze any lien attempts until you bring your attorney." His voice was respectful, but I caught the unease in his eyes. This was not a routine matter. I thanked him, steady and deliberate. Leaving the bank, I clutched the folder as if it were proof of a battle I hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. Stepping outside, I walked past the cafe courtyard near the corner. That's when I heard it. Selene's voice, clear and bright, carried through the ivy-covered wall. "We'll push her again, she's stubborn, but she'll cave." I froze, heart pounding. Another voice, older, Vera's tone of smug reassurance, answered. "The house is worth every ounce of patience." Chairs scraped. Selene laughed lightly. "Once it's signed, we'll handle the rest." I pressed myself against the ivy, each word striking like a stone. They weren't speculating. They were plotting. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't scattered slights. It was a plan rehearsed, shared with ease over coffee in the open air. My son's name wasn't mentioned, but his silence these past days thundered in my ears. Silence is sometimes a shield. Here it was, complicity. I walked back to my car, each step heavy with the weight of confirmation. The truth was no longer hidden in whispers or careless gestures, it had been spoken aloud. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. Instead, I began to list silently the things I must do. Call my late husband's attorney, secure every original document, check the safe in the beach house, prepare witnesses if necessary. Grief clung to me, but I refused to let it take the lead. My sorrow hardened into resolve. They had taken my son's voice, but they would not take my will. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table lamp, casting a steady circle of light over the documents I spread before me. Deeds, wills, insurance forms, all lined up as if standing guard. I opened my journal and wrote slowly, deliberately, "They believe silence means surrender. They've mistaken silence for weakness." I underlined the words once. Outside, the waves crash steady, a reminder that tides can shift without permission. I closed the journal with care and tucked it beside the folder. Then I whispered to the quiet room, if they were preparing their next move, so was I. The evening crept in with a heaviness that matched the ache in my chest. Clouds rolled low across the horizon, swollen and gray, pressing against the ocean, as if to squeeze out every drop of rain they carried. I drove down the winding road to the beach house, the brass key warm in my palm, my husband's key, the one he trusted me with alone. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the air was electric, the salt wind sharp enough to sting. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt the house exhale around me. The familiar scent of cedar and old books clung to the walls, steady against the storm gathering outside. I set water to boil for tea, then walked out to the porch with my cup, listening to the restless waves strike the pilings below. Lightning flickered far out over the Atlantic, followed by a low growl of thunder that rattled through my bones. I wrapped my shawl tighter, my thoughts circling like the storm itself. As the first drops of rain hit the railing, memory returned sharp and sudden. My husband's voice, calm, steady, unshakable, spoke again in my mind. Never sign when your heart feels cornered. Silence can be strength. He told me that years ago when we were finalizing our wills together. He wanted me to understand that hesitation wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was the greatest form of defense. I could see him in my mind's eye, bent over the kitchen table with those papers, his glasses sliding down his nose, his hand warm over mine. "This house is more than wood and stone," he had said. "It's where Gideon learned to walk, where we argued, where we laughed. Protect it not for the walls, but for the history inside them." His words echoed now, threaded through the rumble of thunder, anchoring me as the storm bore down. Rain lashed sideways across the porch screens. I lit a lantern when the lights flickered, its soft glow throwing long shadows on the wooden beams. I pulled the brass key from my pocket, rubbing my thumb across its worn grooves. Down the hall in the small study, the safe stood waiting, our safe. The one that held deeds, insurance papers, and the will we signed together. The storm outside roared, but in that moment I felt steadier than I had in days. Lightning illuminated the ocean in fierce silver waves, cresting like wild horses before collapsing onto the sand. The house shuddered with the gusts, but it stood firm just as it always had. And I thought, so will I. For too long I had let their words cut their silence, wound their plans coil around me like ropes. But the storm was tearing away illusion. It was stripping me bare, leaving nothing but truth. I sat back down, tea cooling in my cup, and whispered into the darkness. "You thought I was weak, but you forgot whose wife I was." My husband had taught me more than patience. He'd taught me how to withstand pressure, how to let storms pass while holding ground. The thunder cracked overhead, closer now, the rain a relentless drum. Yet instead of fear, I felt something else rise in me, a strange cleansing calm. Betrayal had battered me, but it had not broken me. If anything, it had clarified what mattered. They could mock me, crop me from photos, forge papers, even try to twist my son against me, but I was still here. I breathed deeply, the storm spray dampening my hair, and let the resolve settle like bedrock. My silence wasn't surrender, it was preparation. The storm wasn't breaking me, it was baptizing me for what came next. The storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in my bones. That morning, the garden smelled of damp earth and roses, their petals jeweled with droplets that clung as if they too had endured a night of fury. I knelt at the edge of the path, pruning a thorned branch, reminding myself that beauty often grew beside pain. The rhythm of trimming, of pulling weeds and sorting petals into a small wicker basket steadied me. It was a simple task, yet it gave me a fragile sense of control. Inside the house bore the marks of routine. Bills spread across the table in neat stacks, the safe. Checked once more the brass key resting on the mantelpiece where I could see it. These gestures might seem ordinary, but to me, they were declarations. I would not be caught unprepared again. The storm had spoken in my husband's voice, and today, beneath sunlight that stretched warm across the porch, I heard the silence answer back. That silence broke when I saw Melis at the gate. She hesitated, fingers curling around the wrought iron as if unsure whether to enter. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to her. "Morning?" I said, smiling faintly. Her eyes flicked past me toward the house before settling on mine. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. She began, her tone low, confidential. "What is it?" She leaned closer, her words carrying the weight of something overheard but heavy enough to bruise. "At the luncheon yesterday, I sat near Celine. She was talking loud enough for people to hear. She said she'd soon be controlling your beach house. Mentioned lawyers already lined up. People were nodding, laughing. It didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like arrangements." The roses in my basket suddenly felt like thorns pressed against my palms. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the confirmation that whispers had spread beyond family walls. "Thank you," I managed. Melis looked relieved, as though unburdened, then excused herself quickly, as if she feared being caught in the fallout. I stood at the gate for a long time, the sunlight harsh on my shoulders. So it was no longer a private betrayal. It was a performance rehearsed well enough to be shared over cocktails and polite applause. Humiliation and validation twined together, the wound deepened, but the truth was undeniable. That evening, Gideon appeared. His silhouette filled the doorway, familiar yet foreign. When I opened my arms, his hug was brief, perfunctory, a gesture one might give a neighbor, not a mother. I felt the absence of warmth more sharply than any spoken insult. He muttered reassurances, empty words, rehearsed tones, but avoided my eyes. I searched his face for the boy I had raised, the man I had once defended at every turn. But what I saw was distance coached, silence, loyalty, bent towards someone else. I let the hug end without protest. My heart broke quietly in the space between us. Later that night, the phone rang. Vera's voice carried its practiced sweetness. From now on, she said, everything concerning the house will be handled by us. It's better for everyone, less confusion. I held the receiver, listening to her claim as if she were dividing chores, not displacing a life. I appreciate your concern, I said, calm and polite. But my hand trembled slightly as I replaced the phone. In my study, I gathered my papers, deeds, wills, correspondence, and placed them into my husband's old leather briefcase. Its worn surface bore scratches from years of travel, and now it bore my trust. I locked it, sliding the key into a drawer only I could reach. At the desk, I opened my journal and wrote in deliberate strokes, "They expect silence to mean surrender. They will learn silence can also be preparation." I closed the book, pressing my palm flat against its cover. The night hummed with the quiet of strategy, not despair. By the time they asked again, I would not just be waiting, I would be ready. The sea was calmer than I felt. By late afternoon, I drove back to the beach house with my husband's leather briefcase in the passenger seat and the brass key heavy in my pocket. The shingles rattled lightly in the breeze, but the house stood as firm as it always had. Inside, I moved slowly through the rooms, checking doors and locks, then stopped at the entryway where my index card hung. 3 rules, plain and clear. They steadied me more than prayer. On the porch, I brewed tea and poured 2 cups, setting one across from me out of habit. Ritual mattered. I let the ocean's steady rhythm counter the chaos my family stirred. Vera's call from the other night rang in my ears. From now on, everything concerning the house will be handled by us. If she meant to press, I would be ready. The tires arrived before dusk, crunching hard over gravel. Voices followed Celine's sugary tone, Gideon's lower murmur, and another male voice clipped and official. The first knock was sharp. The second rattled the frame. By the third, the pounding shook the glass. Mother Celine called sweetly through the door. Just signatures. Minutes, that's all. I stayed behind the latch, my teacup steady on the hall table. An envelope edge poked through the mail slot, a pen tapped against the glass, as if I might suddenly relent. Gideon's voice carried tense, weary. "Why make this difficult?" The notary added briskly, "I'm on a schedule, ma'am. Best to resolve now." The pounding dragged me back to the wedding night. The seat at the edge, the skipped name, the cropped photo, erasure by design. Only this time I was not stepping into their frame. I lifted the card from the wall and read aloud, my voice even, "No documents accepted without independent counsel. Drafts 48 hours in advance. All meetings scheduled through my attorney. Celine's syrup thinned into vinegar. We only want to protect you. Delays hurt the family. Then protect me by respecting my counsel," I answered. There was a pause, then a hiss sharper than the knock. "You're choosing strangers over family. I'm choosing boundaries over coercion." The silence after my words was louder than the storm had been. The notary cleared his throat, uneasy. I heard him mutter something about rescheduling before footsteps shifted on the porch, then salvation quiet but strong. "All legal matters go through her attorney," Malis said firmly. She stood beside me inside the doorway holding a thermos of coffee, her voice raised enough for them to hear. The balance shifted. The notary retreated fully his shoes, crunching back toward the car. Selena's tone cracked, dragging Gideon behind her. I caught one last glimpse through the side window, my son's hand laced with hers, his face turned away. From the driveway, Vera's voice burst through a speakerphone. "You'll regret this stubbornness, Annalisa." I called back steady as stone. Through counsel or not at all. The car doors slammed, engines roared, gravel spit under their tires until only the surf remained. Milas and I sat at the kitchen table as twilight dimmed. I logged the attempt, time, names, phrases in a notebook. Facts were anchors now. My phone buzzed a text from Celine. "We'll be back." I took a photo of my rule card and sent it to Arthur with a short note. They came with a notary. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, and I breathed in the steam. If they wanted a siege, then I would fortify the gates. Arthur's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Sunlight pushed through the tall windows, pooling yellow over his oak desk, where neat stacks of files waited. He had labeled everything with color-coded tabs, red for property, blue for credit, green for healthcare. I sat down with my husband's leather briefcase in my lap, heart beating fast but steady enough to take notes. Arthur spoke methodically, his glasses slipping lower on his nose. "We'll re-record the deeds, add fraud alerts, update your healthcare directive, and set banking protections. Certified letters go out today." The old teacher in me woke up. I took the pen, wrote down his list, and asked questions one by one. Scope, duration enforcement. Each answer brought air back into my lungs. Boundaries felt firmer than fear. We walked together down Broad Street to the Register of Deeds brick walls rising around us like guardians of history. Inside, the clerk examined my originals with practiced eyes comparing signatures, nodding silently, as if she had seen this dance before. One by one, she stamped each page. The thud of the seal was louder than the chatter of the room, echoing like a drumbeat. Arthur requested a fraud watch flag. The clerk nodded, marking my file so no new power of attorney could slide through without verification. I watched as the red ink bled into the page. Relief swept through me, visible proof that the house, the land, the legacy still bore my name alone. Back at Arthur's office, his paralegal dialed numbers in quick succession. TransUnion Experian Equifax. I listened as operators confirmed freezes and read off confirmation codes. I copied each one carefully onto index cards, date-time operator ID. The card slid into my briefcase beside the stamped deeds, turning paper into armor. For the first time in weeks, my breathing slowed. Fear gave way to control, thin but strong. By afternoon, we stepped into a glass-walled office at the bank on Meeting Street. The manager, professional but kind, walked me through the new safeguards. A voice password, unique to me. No remote changes allowed. No wires, no liens, no beneficiary updates, unless I was physically present. He printed a bright notice for my account and tucked a discreet line into the record attorney of record Arthur. I pictured Celine one day all smiles at a counter, only to hit the wall of these quiet rules. The thought steadied me. Arthur handed me a final stack before dusk certified letters. I signed each one, the ink soaking into thick paper. Notices went to prior counterparties and service providers, warning of unauthorized attempts. We tracked them all, envelopes lined in neat rows. When the green return cards came back, I would pin them to my corkboard as proof. At home, I laid everything out under the lamp on my kitchen table. Stamped deeds, index cards of codes, bank notice sheets, copies of the letters. I logged each step in my notebook, careful with dates and phrases. The kettle hissed. Outside, the ocean was calm again. Inside, my defenses were taller than stone. If they came with pens again, they would find only paper walls they could not push through. Arthur called mid-morning with the tone I had come to recognize, steady, but edged with news that mattered. The bank flagged an attempt this morning, he said. Celine and Vera had walked into the Meeting Street branch with papers in hand, smiling confident. They tried to push through account access, but the manager repeated my new rules. No remote changes, no signatures accepted, no authorization unless I stood there myself. My voice password was required and I wasn't present. Arthur relayed how Celine's charm began to crack when the banker calmly said, "Only Mrs. Annalisa herself can authorize this." Vera's irritation was less restrained. "We'll be back," she reportedly snapped, but the door had already closed on their plan. I set down the phone and breathed. For once, the fortress had held. Later that day, a friend phoned from downtown. She had been at a cafe when Celine and Vera sat too close, too angry to hide their quarrel. Voices rose over the clatter of cups. "Celine accused your timing ruined everything. You're the reason she got suspicious." Vera fired back, her tone sharp enough to turn heads. "It was your ridiculous notary stunt that tipped her off. You pushed too fast." My friend described coffee splashing onto white napkins, a waiter rushing in with towels. The scene made me picture their polished alliance fraying in public view. I thanked my friend, hiding the small curl of satisfaction rising in me. Their unity was never as seamless as they pretended. That evening, my phone rang again. Gideon's voice came through thin and trembling. "Mom," he said, "maybe just sign something so they'll calm down. It's all getting messy." I closed my eyes, listening to the boy I once taught to tie his shoes, sound like a man cornered by his own choices. "No papers without Arthur," I answered quietly. He didn't argue, just breathed heavily before hanging up. His weakness didn't erase my strength. Not long after, an email arrived. Celine's words were smooth-cloaked in civility, an invitation to a family dinner so we could discuss everything peacefully. She wrote of unity, of healing, but every phrase carried edges, and I could see the trap set beneath the lace of politeness. I forwarded it to Arthur. Within the hour, he replied with highlighted notes, pointing out inconsistencies, vague terms, omissions of detail, proof again that the meal was no dinner, it was bait. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a candle-lit journal open. I wrote the cracks between them are louder than their fists on my door. And I closed with a thought that steadied me. If they wanted a dinner, I would let them set the table and then watch as they spilled their own wine. The evening air in Charleston carried that blend of salt and magnolia, warm but edged with tension. I walked up the brick steps of Gideon and Celine's home, my coat light against the spring night. The dining room glowed golden, set with linen napkins and polished silver. Celine moved toward me with rehearsed warmth, her hand cool against mine, her smile rehearsed for the audience of relatives already seated. I felt the room tighten around me, a stage dressed as hospitality. I took my seat at the long table. The chatter of cousins and Vera's laughter filled the air, but underneath it all was a hum of expectation. My chest was steady, though I had come with my leather briefcase resting quietly at my side. My place was set at the center, not the edge, yet it felt more like a spotlight than an honor. I watched their eyes, their rehearsed smiles, their glances to one another. The performance had begun. Halfway through the first course, Celine slid a set of documents across the table, her tone dripping with flattery. We thought, Mother, that it would ease your mind if everything was clear, just family agreements, nothing complicated. Her words were coated in sugar, but I heard the steel beneath them. I did not reach for her pen. Instead, I opened my briefcase and laid out the stamped deeds, the bank confirmations, and the certified notices, each bearing official seals, each louder in truth than any of her sweetened words. Paper against paper, silence against their stage play. For a moment, Celine's expression faltered. Her carefully painted calm cracked just enough for Vera to see. The air shifted. I let the silence hang a wall no signature could break. Then it happened. Vera's voice rose above the clink of forks. You promised this would be done by now. Her tone sharp, her composure gone. The room froze. Celine's face stiffened, color rising. Your timing ruined everything, Celine shot back. The family hushed eyes darting between them. A coffee cup toppled, spilling brown across the white tablecloth, a stain that spread like their unraveling alliance. I sat back, water glass in hand, and let their words do what my silence could not. The truth had its own voice, and tonight it spoke through their blame. Gideon's face fell, his shoulders bent. He looked at me, then back at his wife and Vera, as if searching for a place to stand. His lips trembled before he finally spoke. Mom, maybe if you just sign something, it will calm them down. My heart ached hearing his plea torn between his mother and his wife, but I kept my voice steady. No papers without Arthur. You know that. He lowered his gaze, ashamed, but I saw the flicker of a sun caught in a web he had chosen. Dessert came untouched. The family's chatter turned shallow, broken. I excused myself politely, gathering my documents back into the briefcase. Celine's smile was brittle. Vera's glare could have cut glass. Gideon didn't meet my eyes again. By the time I drove back to the beach house, the moon had risen high, silvering the waves. I unlocked the door, the brass key cool and solid in my hand. Inside, the silence was vast, but not empty. It was mine. The lantern on the porch burned low, its glow steady against the night. I walked through the hall, touching the walls that had held my husband's laughter, the floors that had heard Gideon's boyhood steps. The house breathed with me, not against me. It was still here, still mine, still our legacy. I sat on the porch lantern at my side and let the waves carry the noise of the evening away. The salt air filled my lungs sharp and clean. They had tried to write me out, but I was still here. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence carried me home. Looking back on everything I've shared, I realize silence is not weakness. It can be wisdom. I didn't fight with shouting or anger. I chose boundaries, patience, and faith in myself. Maybe that's the lesson: protect what matters with calm strength, even when those closest to you betray your trust. In America today, many families struggle with money inheritance or respect across generations, but dignity, resilience, and truth will always outlast manipulation. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What did this story stir in your heart? Did it remind you of a challenge in your own family? If this touched you, leave a comment with one or share where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, tell me why. I want to know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Your voice matters here, and together we can keep sharing stories that heal, inspire, and connect.